I still swear allegiance to the Constitution, and and all of Americans. I don't care if you like me or not. I'll show up for you in your time of need, because that's what Marines do. And that's, I think, very deeply ingrained, and it is tied to that oath.
Hello, this is Tab Bartley, and you are listening to the Oath We Took podcast, the show that tells the Marine Corps story through the Marines that serve. I'm joined today by Sarah Klimm. She is the reason for this podcast. I know so many amazing Marines who hesitate to tell their stories. Their stories hold so much power and so many life lessons. Oftentimes, though, they go untold. Not every Marine story is the same. What is the same is the oath we all took. Sarah, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so excited to have you.
I'm excited to be here, Tab.
So I love this podcast,
Mhm.
but I think my favorite part about it is when I have met a Marine and then am able to get them on the podcast, hearing little pieces of their story or building a relationship. It makes something so magical. And so I met Sarah through advocating with Minority Vets of America. And I think Marines in a room instantly, just like click and like find each other.
Yeah.
So I was so excited when you said you would be a guest on the podcast. And I was thinking today, I realized I think we've only actually face-to-face interacted like twice, which was during the advocacy days, it feels like more than that. But to say all that to say that like Marines just instantly have a connection.
And always will.
Yes. So the first question that I always ask people is, why did you decide to join the Marine Corps?
Ooh, that one's interesting. I've had to ask myself that over the years. Why did I do it? Because so much changed after being 20 years. Your kind of perspectives change on things. So originally, I just wanted something to do. I grew up in basically Amish country, Pennsylvania. There's not much going on around here. I knew there was a bigger world out there. And so there were parts, that I just didn't feel like I needed to stay around here. And I was thinking about college, but in high school, I didn't do so great. It was mostly because I didn't apply myself, but I was like, nah, I want to do something different. So I joined the Marine Corps.
And did you know what MOS you were going to pick or what job you wanted to do in the Marine Corps?
Oh yeah, aviation maintenance. I was like, and I mean, I knew a trigger puller wasn't it for me.
Yeah.
It's not what I wanted to do, because I also was thinking about marketable skills coming out when I joined.
Which I feel like a lot of people, when they join the Marine Corps, they either like completely think about what they want to do after or not at all. Like no thought. I just want to be a Marine.
Yeah. No, mine was, I want to be a Marine, but I want to have a skill afterwards that I could apply if I want to.
And so as you've already said, you served 20 years in the Marine Corps. I think, and you kind of like mentioned it, but like, why stay 20 years in the Marine Corps? What is that driving force to stay?
I think it's part of it's something, being something bigger than you, or being a part of something bigger than you. And in my career, actually, I do have broken service in there. I did my first enlistment. I did the 4 years. I did a 6-month extension to deploy, and I got out. Was doing retail. I was agricultural retail store manager between York, Pennsylvania, and Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. And then it was not too long. We had the bombings in. We had the embassy bombings, and it was just like, man, this is horrible out there. And not too long after, I'd had a prior service recruiter contact me and go, hey, we got shortfalls in, I was a 53 mechanic, so we had shortfalls in that MOS. Would you like to go back in? And I contemplated it, and I was like, when I got out, I was young and immature when I got out from my first enlistment, and I'm sitting there thinking, I was like, I actually made it worse than what the Corps really was, just by fighting the system and stuff like that, as most young kids do. So I was like, it wasn't that bad, and I had a lot of good times. So I think when you separate yourself from it for a little bit, you start to lose the bad times, and all your bad experiences kind of start to diminish, and you start remembering all the good experiences. The camaraderie, the brotherhood, the travel, seeing things that nobody else sees. Like when I came back, I'm sitting there at a bar with some of my friends I went to high school with, and we start talking about our lives. And then I was like, okay, I can't say anymore because it sounds like I'm bragging, which the biggest thing that happened to you in the past 6 months is you shot a 10-point buck, and which good for that, but it's like, wow. And so it made me a little uneasy there. And I was like, you know what? Yeah, let's do it. And I went back in. Um, went out to Miramar, and then there were many times along the way where I wasn't sure if I was going to enlist. Um, but I think part of having a family at the time that I was supporting, along the way, got married, had kids. It was it was kind of one of the driving things that kept me in, and I actually started to like what I was doing. As stressful as it was, I was in moving up in the ranks, and now I'm a bigger part of that big picture. It
Yeah.
was exciting.
And
So
you've deployed like a ton of times.
yeah.
And uh, can you kind of talk about like the difference of deployments? Because you've had combat deployments, non-combat deployments, and even like I guess like the years you served, maybe that's it, because it's like pre-GWAT and then into GWAT, which is just like the dynamic. I mean, I feel like most listeners who are listening know that, but I also know there's people who don't. So if you could talk on that a little bit.
So it's interesting because in this we had technology changes along the way, like with between going from snail mail when you're out on the ship, not hearing back from home for sometimes a month or two at a time, to knowing that the letter you send out is going to take another month to get there. So there's a lot of technology changes that came along the way, and I've watched it, like how it improved things and sometimes made things worse too. So my first deployment was to go to Okinawa, which was like, yay. Uh, get to get to Okinawa. I'm staying with the main body in Okinawa. So I'm like, oh, this will be fun. Yes, like this. And then all of a sudden they're like, we're putting a special MAGTF together. And we're like, cool. Because you normally think that the MEU would go out to do something. But they said, no, the MEU's not taking this one. So we're going to put a special MAGTF together. And then we steamed over to Somalia to pull everybody out. And that was my first hostile combat area deployment. And interesting enough, I got a taste of reality on that deployment, sitting on the flight deck one night. We were working on pulling everybody out, and then what happened is the Marines got caught on the beachhead in a crossfire between the two Somali sides. Let's just say it was hell on earth when the Marines lit it up, because we know the Somali sides aren't running tracers, and we were close enough, maybe a mile and a half off the shoreline, and you could hear the pops in the background, and it's like, oh, things are getting a little spicy out there. And then it was just like a half hour of pure hell on earth when the Marines lit open, and we're all like just sitting on the flight deck, like, holy crap, wow. So that was like the first experience of seeing what that looks like for reality, and then realizing all you're seeing is tracer rounds, and knowing the ratio of regular rounds to tracer rounds. You're like, that's a lot of rounds downrange. That is pure death and destruction. So it's kind of like a wake up call as to what combat was for me. And during that period, there wasn't much going on in the world for that. And then I get back and was going to get out. But then they asked me to extend to go on another deployment. That time I went out on the MEU. And then we ended up basically doing Southern Watch, running around the Persian Gulf, keeping an eye on Iraq. This is post the first Gulf War. So just kind of monitoring stuff in the area. And then that's when I got back. That's when I came back, and then I got out immediately after that. And then when I come back in, I go do a deployment to Okinawa, and then so I came back in 99. So then and then we 99 do a deployment to Okinawa in 2001, and boom, sitting there, September 11th pops up. All that it's just in that moment in time when we were sitting in the barracks in Okinawa, and we watched the planes hit the World Trade Center. We were in the middle of a lockdown for a typhoon, where the typhoon parties are banned. So we're sitting in the barracks, partying it up, and we see that happen. And all of us looked at each other in that room and go, well, our life just changed. We're out here in Okinawa. At that time, I was attached to the 31st MEU. We're like, well, shit's about to get real. And sure enough, it started to. And we started to see the things going on, and, like relocating ships and all that stuff. And then we get back. And so then we got back to Miramar, and we were just sitting there in, 2002, like, we're coming up on the holidays. Most of us knew what was coming next. And sure enough, it did. And then that's when we went over, pre-staged for the invasion of Iraq. So, you know, and all the while, it's tough on the families with this stuff going on too. My first two deployments, I wasn't married, but the second deployment, or the deployment to Okinawa with September 11th, and then one to Iraq and everything, I was married. And it's like knowing that, some of us may not come back from this. We don't know who, we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what our role is going to be as a helicopter unit. We don't know where they're going to put us. So, and aviation is inherently dangerous. We know that. With losing friends in training missions, we know that already. Now we add the combat into it and the stressors of combat. It's like, who's not coming back is the question you start thinking to yourself. So had that, and then it was just basically deployment after deployment after deployment, between Iraq and Afghanistan. I did get a small break in there. In 2004, I was by name selected to go to HMX, which was exciting. I had a good time. Had a really good time there. It was a lot of things happened to me in my personal life there. So, in family life, during that period, some good, some bad, or some, I don't know, maybe I would say paved an avenue for other good things. So I enjoyed that. And then I got orders in August of 2008 out of HMX, and it was to report to Miramar September 15th, to deploy to Iraq October 15th. So that was a big family stressor there. And at that point in time, my marriage wasn't so good at that point, and I knew the direction it was heading. So that didn't add to any of the fun times in Iraq. And
And
then
I kind of want to like pause here because it's something that too, I think when you joined, like I joined at a time where like we were already at war. And so I
yeah,
think that like we knew in dual military as well, but I don't think we thought about the stressors of like the family
yeah,
and the how that would impact us, or how anything going on in the world or hearing anything in the Marine Corps, how much of an impact that would have on the family. And I think especially like for those who joined right before kind of calm to then
mhm,
like 10, over 10 years of war.
yeah.
What personally were like some of the impacts that like you saw, or that like looking back now that you were like, this could have been prevented more, there's more that we could have done, or the Marine Corps could have done, the Institute, or so on and so forth, to better support the families so then the Marines better supported? Because that's the thing, right? I think,
Right.
how often have you heard, well, we didn't issue you a wife, or we didn't issue you kids? Cool,
Oh,
awesome. However, somebody has to take care of the Marines.
yeah, that's a really tough one. I heard that numerous times. In fact, it was like even down to simple things about standing duties when it came to families. Like, there was basically, in a way, discrimination in duty standing, where Marines that lived in the barracks were, always the ones having to stand duty because they didn't have families. And it's like, well, wait a minute. So, it's kind of like, I see both sides here. We got to be equal in all this stuff and not reward somebody for having a family. Because then we also started to see Marines getting married just to get out of the barracks and stuff like that, which then you end up in these crazy divorces and crap that now you got to deal with as a leader. So it's really tough. And then, I mean, there's other things with the combat stuff. You know, especially when you're in the senior enlisted and all that, things that you don't want to tell your family. you know so you would love to be able to talk to your family about the stress you're feeling from some of these things, that's coming up, but you don't want to stress your family out at the same time. So you bottle a lot of that in. There's times when, you're deployed, you got your family member on the phone, you're talking to them, and then all of a sudden you hear that pop in the background. It's like, oh crap, IDF coming in. Oh, hey, I gotta go, bad connection, bye, click, and hang the phone up. Because you don't want a family member on the other end hearing the explosions going off. So And then you still got to sugarcoat it while you're deployed. Then you go, well, what happened the other night? Oh, it must have been a bad phone connection, because you don't want to stress your family out. And then there's the side of, you know, while you're deployed, your family's still doing their thing back home. And they're running into the normal family things, from their work to the kids in school to the car breaking down. And you're not there to help with any of that. And I'll say, going back in some of the early deployments, it was all snail mail. So usually you get a letter from somebody back home telling you this entire problem. By the time your letter gets to them on how to solve the problem, it's already been solved. Then we get the technology of email and all that stuff, and it's instantaneous. So, like, as a leader of Marines, all of a sudden your Marines coming to you, oh my God, this is going on back home, blah blah blah, and their head's not in the game anymore. And then you got to go, it'll be okay. We've got resources, and you got to try to calm that down. So it was very interesting that watching the technology change also, and how that affected, keeping your Marines' heads in the game and keeping it together. In like tackling those stressors while you're already got combat stressors and operational stressors on everybody, trying to balance that out and take care of the Marines at the same time and ensure their families are taken care of. So
And I was actually going to ask you that too, because like I feel like, spouses with how advanced technology are, like, were you seeing a lot where spouses were expecting responses back, like, and
yes,
expecting things because like, well, this technology exists. I know you saw it or whatever, when it's like, well, how did you deal with that as a leader?
it's well, the heart of on the leadership side, the Marines understood what was going on.
Yeah.
So like a lot of I mean, I've got almost 2 years of sea time, so you're out on a ship, and when you're getting into when it comes time, you're in operational modes. They shut all communications off and are down going off the ship. That way you get nothing off, and it can be instantaneous, where there is no warning that it's getting shut down, and it might be shut down for a week to 2 weeks at a time. And you've got a spouse back home that was used to messaging all night long. In fact, we used to run Yahoo Messenger on some of the computers, talking to our spouses. We'd be working on stuff, and hit Yahoo Messenger for a little bit of time, saying hi, hello, and have these conversations going on. And then all of a sudden, it just shuts all communication. All communication gets shut down, and it's for weeks at a time. And you're like, crap. Oh my God, my wife was dealing with this. My mom is sick. My dad's this. Oh crap, and I can't get a message to him. And you run into those moments, and then it's kind of like you got to reframe it and go, look, make sure and I would prep my Marines. I said, let your family members know, if you go silent, it's not a bad thing. Okay. It's not a bad thing of anything out here, because remember, in the military, no news is good news. Especially when you're in those situations, no news is good news, because if it's bad news, they're going to come and let you know. So don't get all, prep your family members, don't get all upset. This is just how it works for operational security. So, but of course, everybody's different, and everybody handles the situation different. So you really had to tailor it a lot of times to not just the Marine, but to the Marine spouse, knowing those dynamics also as a leader. So there's a lot of being hands-on like that with your Marines, and knowing your Marines, lives and what they got going on in the background, so that you could always keep focused, keep them in the game, keep them, keep their morale up, with all their family stuff too. So it's a balancing act.
Which this is, I think, one of the many reasons why I say the Marine Corps and Marines have the best leadership, because you don't see this anywhere else to this level of like, I mean, you literally just said I couldn't just think about the Marines. I had to think about how to lead the Marines for their spouses. And so I think that there's that dynamic again, that no other job is your family so tied to who the leader is leading. You have to think about their family too. It's not even just that individual.
Yeah. I mean, like, even coming down to, you might have a single mom is one of your Marines, and their kid's sick and they can't take them to daycare. You got to be flexible on that stuff. And I've seen bad leadership around issues like that. And here's, we invest so much money and training and stuff into our Marines. You want to cultivate that talent, and keep it around. You don't want it to go because their kid got sick, and you were a bad leader and didn't know how to navigate around that situation to keep the Marines morale up and still get the mission done. you're going to lose a lot of talent along the way. And I think we've seen a lot of that happening over the years. So you really got to learn how to balance that human side of, being a leader, and your Marines being humans also, with the same things you go through.
The Oath We Took podcast, hosted by Marine Corps veteran Tab Bartley, tells the Marine Corps story through the Marines who served. While every story is unique, the common bond is the oath they all took. Tune in Mondays at 5 p.m. Eastern on Wreaths Across America Radio to catch these engaging conversations. Tab is also supporting the Military Women's Memorial through her Wreaths Across America sponsorship page. For every veteran's wreath you sponsor at wreathsacrossamerica.org/The Oath We Took, $5 will go directly to the Military Women's Memorial, the leading memorial and education center honoring the commitment, contributions, and experiences of servicewomen. Once again, to donate, go to wreathsacrossamerica.org/The Oath We Took.
I've had, and even in my own personal life, HMX, it's a very, very demanding role there.
And can you explain what HMX is for those who may not know what HMX is?
HMX, that's the Presidential Helicopter Squadron. So when you see the president being transported by helicopters, that's the Marines doing it. So they call them the white tops, the green aircraft with the white top. But there's other sides that go in behind that too, in HMX. But I got by name selected there. I get there, and it was, my wife and I at the time were trying to have children, and she got pregnant, and there were lots of complications. And my leadership was great. They understood that through the extended hospitalizations and everything going on, and then they were so supportive even when my this would have been my first child was stillborn, and they supported me through all of that. And then luckily the doctors understood what happened and everything else, and I call my son Wyatt. He's our little angel, because he led the way for us to have a daughter. And my daughter is amazing. We have a very, very extremely strained relationship, if I can even call it a relationship. So many things. And again, the military ties into this. At one point, she basically called me a deadbeat parent because I was never around. And it's like, wow, you're living on the East Coast, I'm on the West Coast, constantly deploying. I'm sorry, and then so there's a lot of dynamic in there, but my leadership was there to support the whole way. There to support, even though I was feeling bad that I couldn't be there at work doing my role in my billet that they needed. They were there to support me very well, and that helped and things like that, and having good leaders along the way helped shape my my human informed type leadership style, and because I saw the good in that. And I say it's about learn from every leader, good or bad, because they give you examples of how not to be too. And so you take those things and take the good from each one of these different leaders that you meet, and you bring it into yourself and into your leadership style. And that's what I try to do. Not perfect. No human's perfect. I've made mistakes along the way in that, but it's to see leaders actually taking care of their Marines and still being able to navigate the mission space was where you need to focus when training people to be leaders. I mean, because no weapon fires itself without somebody pulling the trigger, and so you got to think about that. Every weapon system that we have in the military, there's a human behind it somewhere, one way, shape, or form, whether it's in the repair of it, whether it's the engagement of it, the planning of all, the battle planning, there's a human involved in there. And you got to keep that in your leadership style.
And I think like one of the things that I didn't know why you were serving in the Marine Corps, but I've seen it as you've advocated in the stories that you've told and the way you've talked about things, but your willingness to call the things out that you saw that were not right. And I think that that's something that we need more of, especially in the Marine Corps. How did you learn that? Because to me, observing again from the storytelling and what I have seen from you is it was because the reason why you're able to do that in a way that people listen is because you look at the human, you look at the individual, you look at those things. And so how did you bring that then to when it comes to like advocating or calling things out?
Well, I've always been the one that raised the bullshit flag. I, even as a kid, it was like I was always one to raise the bullshit flag. Like, oh no, we're not doing that. In fact, even my going away plaque is got a little thing on there about how I taught everybody how I taught everybody I taught them how to piss everybody off up and down the flight line, but to get the job done and get it done right. It's sometimes you got to piss some people off to get what you need to get the job done right. So I was never afraid of that. And I wasn't afraid of taking the stand for the right and just things, and calling it out. And I did. I will say a little story on that. I know along the way I pissed a lot of people off, and I had a Marine, another was a staff sergeant with me working at HMX, who me and him were like oil and water. And there was one day, so in HMX, it's a little trailer where the line shop is, and you go out on the back deck, and you got the Potomac right out there. And one day I took him out on that back deck, and I looked at him, and I told him, I said, "Here's something you need to learn, and learn it really fast. People don't like us. They don't like me. They don't like you. They don't like us. They only keep us around because we get a job done." I said, "So don't ever go thinking people are liking you, because they don't. I don't think they like me." So, and after that, me and him, completely good, not a single issue. And I think that was a lot of it too, because I was there. My mantra was, I'm here to get a job done, not make friends. If we're friends in the end, then that is awesome, and I'll take it. But I kind of always went that way. So I think it made it easy for me to stand up against, the things that weren't right, the things that were unjust. I can say there was a part of the reason why I had quick orders out of HMX. There was I definitely rubbed some people the wrong way because they weren't following Marine Corps policies, and I was calling them out on it, and they were pretty senior enlisted. So,
But I think it speaks volumes again to yet you did it in a respectful way, in a humanizing way, and in a way where like you can be blunt, you can be abrasive, you can be all of these things and still be tactful and still be professional and still be like, all they could do for you then was to, okay, let's send you somewhere else, right? Like that was the only thing they could do is let's find a way for them to move on.
I'll even give this is the crazy part. They were changing the mentoring program around, and they had just released a new order in the mentoring program, and there were some issues in it. So I went to go seek advice. I got told, yeah, we're not doing that. I'm like, what? This is the new order. We're not doing it. So yeah, that was the type of stuff. Like, come on, these are the rules and policies that are being laid out. I go to seek guidance on it, and you just tell me you're not going to follow the rules and policies. And it's like, what type of leader are you? Was my question. And I stood on those grounds, and that's why I was pretty much bye.
But it didn't end your career, right? Like you kept
Oh,
going. It wasn't like a
absolutely
career
not.
ender. And I think
No.
that's important for people listening to know that like you can be the catalyst to change. You can be the person calling things out and all of that. And so 20 years in the Marine Corps, what was your deciding factor for getting out of the Marine Corps?
Ooh. So for one thing I say is, when you make decisions like that, they're very multifaceted. There's a lot of different things that go in behind it. At the time, the wife I was married to, there were some health conditions there, and they weren't going to be conducive, I would say, with overseas deployments. And I knew at that point in my career, I was a gunny for 8 years, never got looked at for promotion, just because they shut promotions down, everything else. I ended up being the most senior gunny in my MLS. And so I knew I was getting promoted. If I had stayed in, I knew that year I was getting promoted, or the upcoming year I'd be getting promoted. And I knew there was a lot of talk with some other people about the path for me, where they wanted to see me go down the road after that promotion. And I knew it would have involved an overseas deployment. And with my wife having some health conditions, and having a very young daughter at that time, it's like she's not gonna be able to deploy with me. So I can't, so I'm like, I cannot do an unaccompanied tour, not in this situation. And then I mean the other big one of the big factors was I was I was done being in the closet. I'm like, I've done my time. Now it's time to be me, was part of it. Big factor in there. Heck, funny enough, after seeing being there for before, during, and after, don't ask, don't tell,
Yeah.
my retirement date is the exact date that then Secretary of Defense Ash Carter announced open trans service. I'm like, go figure. Go figure. So, but yeah, so I mean, it's a very multifaceted type thing, and it was like, well, I did my time, and in the end, I ended up with 20, just a little over 21 active years, 23 years of service, part in there because of the inactive time I did in that little period. I got out, and it was like, well, time to move on to bigger and better things. I'm ready to do it. So, or just different things. I've earned it. I'm done with it. Remove any one of those factors, I might have stayed in, so it's.
And I love that you brought that up because, again, when it goes back to this conversations of like families and our lives and like us as individuals, it does have such an impact. You could present the most perfect scenario of everything in the Marine Corps, and it doesn't mean that it would be right for you and your family or right for you at that moment. And so I think oftentimes when there's leaders who ignore that or ignore those things, it's just like this is where the human piece comes in. This is where like the Marine, like I get the Marine Corps has a mission, but if you're not focusing on Marines individually as well, that's where, that's it's just
it's and we lose that, and I mean, and we can even we hear it in rhetoric going around now, where I see a lot on the civilian side that they think that their military members are like machines, and that they're machines and they can't have any issues whatsoever because they're this fighting, killing machine. That's not true, and I think we lose that. We lose the idea of our members are, our members are humans. They have human issues just like everybody else does. And I think sometimes we can even see that in recruiting and retention where they're missing out on that. They're not, when they, depending on policies that get enacted or reenacted and things like that, it sends bad messaging out there too, because a lot of our younger generations know that they are humans, and they're not going to want to join if they don't think they're going to be respected as a human. So
and it goes back to, I think, like what you're so good at, like sharing your story in a way that people listen. It's like, just because you have issues or are going through things does not mean you're not resilient, doesn't mean like you're weak, doesn't mean like you are broken. Like these things don't equal that. And I feel like there's a lot of narrative in the veteran space or the perception of veterans that they're broken, that they're all of these things. And it's just like having mental health or depression or like life impacting you doesn't mean that you are broken.
No, it doesn't mean it at all. I mean, there's like even during periods of my career with family health issues, I've had to leave a deployment early because of a family health issue. And there's that part from like inside of me, it was like I felt like I was leaving my Marines behind. I had an instance even when that deployment I was on an extension for, when this was about my Marines, not about my family side of it, but the feeling of leaving them behind. I was we were on the ship off the coast of Hawaii, and I was working on a helicopter, and the ship turned into heavy winds without announcing on the flight deck, and some helicopter components moved in the wrong directions and ripped my thumb off. They medevac me to Tripler. I'm sitting in Tripler, and I was coming up, well, it was right around the same time as when my original contract would have ended. And they were saying, why don't you just get out? I was like, no, my Marines on the ship need me. I got to get back to them, So I rehabilitated, for a couple of weeks. They flew me to Singapore, waited for the ship to pull in Singapore, and got right back on the ship with my Marines. So that's always in there too. But then when you're adding into the family stuff, like when I had to leave a deployment early for a family health issue, I had the same thing. Luckily, it was towards the end of the deployment. And I was in a critical role. I was a maintenance controller, and there's only two of us, and we run day crew and night crew, and there's only two maintenance controllers for 53s on those Mews. So it's like I can't leave. Um, but it worked out, and luckily it was towards the end of the deployment, and so it worked out. But we have those issues that come up, and so I found with most Marines, sometimes their call to the mission is so strong that their family gets left behind. And it's trying to teach your Marines how to navigate that balancing back and forth. And I'll say there were many times that I balanced so much of it that it was too much, and it leads to burnout.
Yeah.
With family health issues, being in a very critical role as a maintenance control chief of the helicopter squadron, everybody's depending on you to get aircraft fixed. It's you got to figure all this out. So you're always, you're always on call. I mean,
Yeah.
the phone calls at 3 and 4 in the morning constantly. Gunny, what do we do? I'm like, oh, I'll be there in an hour anyway. Could you have waited? So, within managing where, you got a child, you got a spouse that has some health issues going on, and then you got a young child that, the spouse and those issues can't get to daycare in the morning and all that. So now you're balancing getting the child to daycare, picking the child up from then getting to work, taking care of everything, picking the child up from daycare, coming home, doing dinner, doing everything else, still fielding phone calls all night long of stuff going on, and then repeat the cycle. There were times where I'd have to get up super early. I'd get up at like 2 in the morning to take care of an issue at work because it needed to be taken care of before the morning maintenance meeting, in which I knew I wouldn't be able to be at because I had to take my daughter to daycare in the morning. So I was 2 in the morning going to work, take care of issues, come back home, get maybe an hour of rest, grab my daughter, take her to daycare, and then repeat the cycle. It's like rinse and repeat, doing this forever and ever. And in trying not to let either side of it, the family side or the career billet side, fail. It can get very tough and stressful doing that. And but I've had good, great leadership recognizing the family issues that I had, knowing that was going on and all this was going on at the same time, and I was still able to perform. So
Yeah.
it really, I mean, if I wasn't able to perform, they would have moved me out of that billet because of my family issues. But I told them, I said, no, I can nail this. I'll still got it. So we'll keep going.
And again, every time I'm like, gosh, I feel like we could talk for, like you said, like 5-10 episodes, but kind of moving towards your transition out of the Marine Corps, you have done so much since you've transitioned out of the Marine Corps, and you're still advocating for the Marines and the Marine Corps and service members. Can you talk a little bit how that kind of like came about? How did you get in the advocacy world? Kind of some of the things you've been doing. And then I think we'll take a deeper dive into like how you use your story for power and a narrative and for people to listen, because you are so good at it. So good at it.
I'm just me. Nothing more, nothing less, just 100% me. This is what you get. But so transitioning out, what led me into advocacy, it was actually discrimination that led me into advocacy. I'd come out as trans, and of course, I'm a person that studies policy, knows policies, knows all the rules before I step into a situation. And I knew all the VA rules and policies. So when I came out, it was pretty much immediately, just right as, as I I was living in Denver at the time. As soon as I went to Denver, I told them right away, I'm transgender, and got that already into the mental health records, everything else. And, started working that. And of course, well, saying I was, but, we confirm it through medical practice, through mental health therapy and understanding and all that, confirm it through there. But I also, then it came to a point in time, I was like, I would like to try hormone therapy. So I go to try to start hormone therapy at the VA. My primary care is like, okay, cool. I'll get you a consult for endocrinology. Endocrinology came back and said they weren't going to do it. And they cited some old guidelines from the Endocrinology Society. And thing is this did not align with the VA policy out there. This was a specific provider doing what they wanted to do without following VA policy. And I'm like, oh, hell no. Not playing this game. So So then that started rolling me into the advocacy. And then because I was like, I started to try to fight and take it on myself. And I was like realizing I'm not gonna be able to do this myself. Who else out there is working these spaces that I think that I can get a hold of to help in this battle? So it's like internet, here we go. And I'm looking through them, I was like, and I hit Minority Vets. And I was like, okay, that message resonates with me. Let me reach out. And then I also saw that they had volunteer positions available. And I was like, I like policy. And I mean, naval aviation, it is nothing but policy. It is books and books and books of policy on how to run things, do things. So, and I was like, and then we have all our Marine Corps orders on the other side for leadership stuff and all that. And I was like, I was a policy nerd. So I said, well, let me like to work in policy. So I got started with Minority Vets in policy that way. And even going back to the discrimination, it didn't end there. When the endocrinology society guidelines changed, I went back to the VA. Same endocrinologist then discriminated against me by age. Now, mind you, I was like 44 at the time, and the endocrinologist came back and said, well, given our veteran population is older and there's not enough studies, and it's like, oh, okay. So I guess 44 is your new old for all this stuff now. And the other part too in there was along the lines of, I was already on hormone therapy through TRICARE. You didn't review my record to know that, which VA has policies about medications that veterans are already currently on. So it was just a blanket denial. So that's how discrimination got me into the advocacy space.
And I think like, again, that's where like policy is so important, but just because there's a policy doesn't mean people are following it.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why we got to go raise that bullshit flag.
I think that's going to be like from the episode, like we need a
Yep.
BS flag. How has, or I say, at what levels and where all have you advocated, and how do you share your story so rawly and so much without kind of like taking on too much, because we talked about it before we started recording, how like when you have a privilege or an ability to be in a space and to talk about things where people can listen, I really believe that you should if you can, but it's like if you have the capacity. So what are some of the things that you've done in that to make sure that you have the capacity, or when you do have the capacity that you fully go into it?
Well, it's, for me, the advocacy, it's a continuation of service. It really is. So while the stories are personal, and I bring stories in from leadership stuff, I can bring it in from the personal things that happened to me. It's that I know that there are so many out there that don't have a voice, or don't have the I don't even want to call it privilege, but like talking about the other day, the background that I do have, it brings a credibility privilege to when I'm speaking, and I know that. So I kind of tap into that and use my voice for the ones that can't use their voice, whether it's military sexual assault victims, whether it's about gender affirming care bans, whether it's about women in combat roles or any role in the military. All those things, I've got the broad perspectives on them and been there for that. And I know how many of those people are back there that don't have a voice, and so I kind of tap into it as its mission, but it does have a burden in there, and that's a hard one to sometimes take on. Like, even hearing being in the space with other people telling their stories, taking on their emotions too, because you can hear when there's that human side, and when you hear an assault victim tell their story, it grabs you, to the point where you can feel those emotions coming up inside of you for that person. And I think, but hearing those stories and all that make it also encouraging to keep fighting and to keep making the changes that we need to make change and protecting those that don't have a voice. So I think that's a big part of why and how. And you asked in spaces. I do it in speaking engagements, done speaking panels. Then there's other ways of advocacy, like directly advocating or doing advocacy with the legislators. Going Capitol Hill, going into meetings with the staff and the legislators, and there's one thing when you bring that human experience and you put a face to the problem, it can move people. I mean, a lot of it's moved me in my advocacy and made me stronger in certain advocacy areas. And then you connect with other people in the advocacy space, and they're working advocacy in other areas. In other areas of the country, like out here, I'm a Marine, another Marine, Vietnam veteran. He is out there battling on military sexual assaults, and then the effects afterwards, military sexual trauma. He's battling it to get it in the even spotlight in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And we're constantly talking back and forth as he's doing meetings about viewpoints and topics and data and research. So we fuel each other in the advocacy spaces too. And so advocacy is happening nationwide in all the spaces. And through our interconnectivity, we're kind of working everywhere. Like, well, he might be giving the information to a legislator in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. I'm feeding him information to give. So in essence, I'm there. He's giving me information. I get information from yourself too, Tab. We all work together. So we're like advocating everywhere as a group.
And I don't think I was prepared, not because people didn't prepare me, but like how hard physically it is to advocating on the Hill when you have disabilities. Like I don't think people realize like it is physically draining. It is emotionally draining. It is mentally draining on top of just like the work of doing it. But like physically, I don't think I knew because I work in DC, but it was just like it's hard to find restrooms. It's hard to like the floors are not conducive to like shoes and back pains and all of these things. And I think that's a piece of it that like again, here's an accessibility issue without it being like one that you realize, right? Like
Yeah. When we're down there doing advocacy type days, you're talking 2 to 3 days of constant meetings. And a lot of people don't understand how large the congressional complex is. It's gigantic. And you're bouncing from one office building to another office building within 5 minutes. So you get done one meeting, you got 5 minutes to get across the complex to like the Senate buildings on the other side. And then you got to navigate through, a 500,000 square foot office building to get to that one office you're at. Then you're done that office, and then you're back over to the other side of the complex on the House side, because the legislators' schedules, they're tight. So we have to adapt to that. And when you got disabilities, things like I have fibromyalgia, which you never know when that's going to flare up.
yeah.
Sometimes it flares up while you're down there doing that, and it gets aggravated while you're down there doing that, and you push through it. Irritable bowel syndrome, all service-connected disabilities from my time in the Persian Gulf. So you're pushing through these disabilities, but it's because of the purpose. You're pushing through it, and it's hard, and sometimes we got to look better at some of the accommodations and realize that what goes on Capitol Hill is not just the legislators. You have advocates like us coming in there. You have have your constituents coming in there. It's not just the legislators and their staffs. It's ridiculous. People don't realize how much activity is going on in there. So it's something we pay attention to, but it's not easy work. It is not easy, and I can tell you, after doing it, no matter what shoes you wear, no matter what, I don't care what you put on your feet, you are going to have blisters. People don't realize that marble is harder than concrete. Yeah. And after doing that down there, walking all those marble floors, your feet feel it.
They do.
Your whole body does.
Yeah, it's wild. And again, like I said, because I work down there in a building with marble, but it's just like even that day, it was just like I'm glad that I didn't sign up for more. Like I'm glad it didn't work out. I would have, but my body wouldn't have been able to handle it. And sadly, like we're coming to like before the last question, is there anything that we didn't talk about that you want to make sure that we talk about in this episode?
Well, your name of your podcast, is there. That's a big one. I really think that's a big one that I think sometimes I think we as Marines take that one more than a lot of other branches do. Not that
Yeah.
it makes it any less, because we are Marines. It's that we earned that title, and it's like deeply ingrained and embedded in us. So, I think that like, especially the oath for me, never goes away.
Yeah.
There were times where I've questioned it when I'm seeing that, the rights and freedoms that I fought to defend, I'm not allowed to have. Really made me question it over a couple times, where it's like, we fight for, I stood there to defend and fight, for everybody to achieve the American dream. But now knowing that I can't necessarily navigate even freely throughout all of the states in the US, that I didn't sign up to protect one state, so it's I'll call it, messes with your mind a little bit and understanding. But then, long period of reflection and reflection, looking back and everything else, it's still there. That oath is still there, and I wouldn't change a thing. And it still carries me to this day. I still swear allegiance to the Constitution, and all of Americans. I don't care if you like me or not. I'll show up for you in your time of need, because that's what Marines do, and that's, I think, very deeply ingrained, and it is tied to that oath. When, and the other side is losing friends, whether it was training accidents, whether it's combat, and losing close personal friends because of that oath. It makes it more powerful for me.
And with that, I first have to say thank you so much for being willing to share your story, for the amount that you share your story, not just on this podcast, but like out in the world, and for your service. And then I'm going to ask the last question, which is, if you had to take that oath again, would you?
Absolutely. Absolutely. 100%. 100%. Give me the opportunity and I'll take it again. I don't know in what capacity it would be in, but I will still take that oath.
This is the Oath We Took podcast, and you just heard a piece of Sarah's story. You now know one more Marine and one more piece of Marine Corps history. Her sacrifices matter. Her stories matter. Not every Marine's story is the same. We didn't all join the military for the same reason. What is the same is the oath we all took. An oath that easily could have ended in death, and for some, it did. So listeners, instead of asking you to thank a Marine for their service, I am going to challenge you to continue to listen to their stories instead.